The old house on Elm Street had always had a feeling, not overtly spooky, but a persistent chill in the sunniest rooms, a tendency for shadows to deepen just a little too much, and the faint, almost imperceptible whisper of forgotten arguments carried on non-existent drafts. Elias Thorne, a freelance astrophysicist who preferred the quiet solitude of his ancestral home to the bustling, hyper-connected arcologies, dismissed it as old house quirks. He'd lived here since childhood, inherited it from his grandmother, and knew every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the ancient pipes. He found comfort in its familiar oddities, its steadfast refusal to conform to modern, sterile design. His current research, however, was anything but mundane. Elias specialized in gravitational anomalies and interdimensional physics, focusing on unexplained energy bleed-throughs from adjacent realities. Lately, his home-built sensor array, nestled discreetly in the attic, had been picking up something new, something unsettling. Not the usual faint dimensional static, but coherent, rhythmic pulses. They weren't transmitting data. They were absorbing it. Elias correlated the readings with local news feeds, a worrying spike in inexplicable depression in the nearby town, a sudden surge in collective apathy, an increase in minor, seemingly meaningless vandalism. He'd noted similar patterns on older galactic historical records, periods of widespread malaise that seemed to precede major societal collapses. On various alien worlds, the subtle changes in his house began to align with his research. The chill became colder, more deliberate. Shadows seemed to move with an intelligence he couldn't grasp. One evening, as he sorted through old family photos, faded images of his great-grandparents, his grandmother as a child, his own parents, a single photograph of his grandmother's wedding day flickered, its colors momentarily draining, leaving a grayscale void before snapping back. Elias felt a sudden, profound pang of meaninglessness. A fleeting thought that all these cherished memories were just arbitrary arrangements of light and chemical reactions. He shook his head, blaming fatigue. Later, while reviewing his attic sensor data, a distinct, localized energy signature manifested directly in his living room, correlating precisely with the flicker of the photograph. It wasn't radiation. It was a conceptual drain, a siphon of coherence. Elias realized with a jolt of ice in his stomach that the feeling in his house wasn't just old pipes or drafts. Something was here. Something was actively present, listening, feeding. He looked at the family photos, the worn armchair where his grandmother used to tell him stories, the slightly chipped mantelpiece where he'd carved his initials as a boy. These weren't just objects. To him, they were anchors, mnemonic points dense with personal history and emotion. And something was trying to unravel those threads, to drain the meaning from his most cherished memories. The Echo, as he tentatively named it, was no mere ghost. It was a predator of purpose, and his home, so rich in human meaning, was its target. Elias, now convinced of a malignant presence, shifted his research from distant galactic anomalies to the immediate, unsettling truth of his own home. He dubbed the entity the Echo, a creature from a dimension of pure meaninglessness, drawn to the vibrancy of coherent reality, consuming it to fuel its own paradoxical existence. His attic sensor array was recalibrated, focusing on localized conceptual energy fluctuations. He found that the Echo's feeding cycles corresponded with moments of intense, low-level despair or apathy, not just within his house, but radiating outwards into the town. The Echo wasn't just draining. It was cultivating emotional emptiness. The manifestations in the house became more frequent, more insidious. Objects wouldn't disappear, but their purpose would briefly vanish. Elias might find himself staring at a teacup, utterly unable to recall what it was for, its very teacupness dissolving into arbitrary form. Conversations with friends would sometimes hit a sudden, jarring conceptual blank, a word or phrase momentarily losing all meaning, leaving an awkward, chilling silence. He started finding small, personal items, a bookmark from a beloved book, a favorite pen, perfectly intact but devoid of any emotional resonance, as if their significance had been delicately siphoned away. He reached out to a former colleague, Dr. Elias Thorne, no relation, but a shared surname was a running joke, a renowned xenopsychologist at the Federation's Xeno-Interaction Department. Aris, initially skeptical, listened with growing unease as Elias described his findings, comparing the echo's behavior to ancient, almost mythical tales from elder races. These tales spoke of the Void Weavers or the Great Unminds, entities that were not evil in a moral sense, but fundamentally anti-existence, seeking to reduce all reality to their own state of absolute nullity. They were considered theoretical, relegated to the realm of cosmic horror fiction. Aris suggested a theory. Perhaps humanity, with its rich, often irrational emotional landscape and its stubborn insistence on meaning even in chaos, was an exceptionally potent source of conceptual energy. Other species, far more logical, might simply burn out or retreat into blandness when faced with such entities. But humans, with their vast, interconnected web of memories, traditions, and collective narratives, were like giant, pulsing conceptual batteries. Elias's ancestral home, dense with generations of love, grief, joy, and sorrow, was a veritable feast. Elias looked around his living room, at the worn carpet, the slightly peeling wallpaper, the bookshelf crammed with well-loved novels. He recalled the flicker of his grandmother's wedding photo, the sudden sharp pang of meaninglessness. The echo wasn't just a physical intruder. It was a conceptual parasite, a predator of purpose, and his home, rich in the very things that made him human, was not just a target, but a battleground. He realized with a terrifying clarity that his personal connection to this old house, his very love for it, was both the bait and, potentially, the only weapon. As the echo's presence intensified, Elias felt its insidious influence pressing in on his mind. He found himself increasingly susceptible to bouts of profound apathy, moments where his scientific pursuits, his personal interests, even his connection to his memories, seemed utterly pointless. He knew it was the echo's effect, a subtle psychic numbing, but fighting it felt like trying to grasp smoke. He needed a defense, something more robust than his faltering willpower. He turned to his family, not for help, but for a shield. His estranged sister, Clara, lived a few states away, caught up in the corporate grind, a world away from Elias's academic solitude. He hadn't spoken to her in months, their relationship strained by old family arguments. But Clara had always been fiercely sentimental, holding on to traditions, remembering every family birthday, every holiday. She was a living repository of shared memories, a powerful conceptual anchor. Elias didn't tell Clara about the echo. He couldn't. How do you explain an interdimensional meaning parasite? Instead, he leveraged their estranged past, subtly manipulating their shared history to provoke contact. He sent her a photo of an old, faded family portrait, an unspoken reminder of their childhood. He left an ambiguous message about family history on her old answering machine, knowing her innate curiosity for their roots. Slowly, cautiously, Clara began to respond. Their old sibling bond, frayed but still intact, starting to reestablish itself. The moment Clara called, their first proper conversation in months, Elias felt a strange shift in the house. The pervasive chill in the living room momentarily lessened. The subtle flicker of meaning around objects seemed to stabilize. His attic sensors registered a counterpulse, a faint positive conceptual energy emanating from within the house, disrupting the echo's siphon. It wasn't a weapon. It was a resonance. The shared memory, the re-established connection, the very act of remembering a bond, was generating a protective field. Elias realized that the elder race's warnings about the Void Weavers mentioned species that retreated into absolute blandness, shedding all strong emotional ties. They had become conceptually sterile, uninteresting to the echoes. But humans, with their messy, complicated, deeply interconnected lives, were different. Their love, their grief, their shared histories, these weren't vulnerabilities. They were defenses. Each memory, each tradition, each shared laugh or tear was a thread in an intricate, powerful tapestry of meaning. The echo sought to unravel these threads, but the more threads there were, the denser and more tangled the tapestry became, the harder it was to break. Elias had accidentally stumbled upon humanity's greatest, most subconscious defense, the unspoken bond of family and shared experience. Elias, now armed with the terrifying knowledge of the echo and the nascent understanding of humanity's unconscious defense, began a desperate, meticulous experiment. He subtly encouraged Clara to revisit old family memories, to share anecdotes from their childhood, to talk about their grandmother. He started hosting small, carefully planned gatherings at the old house, inviting distant relatives for dinner parties, ostensibly to reconnect. He subtly encouraged them to share old stories, to look through photo albums, to simply be together and remember. With each shared memory, each laugh, each moment of human connection and emotional resonance, the house subtly changed. The pervasive chill receded further. The shadows seemed less predatory. The conceptual siphons Elias detected from the echo became weaker, more erratic, as if struggling to penetrate a dense, shimmering barrier. The house itself, saturated with generations of human meaning, was becoming an active ward. It was no longer just a place. It was a conceptual fortress. Elias realized the true nature of the Hearthstone Wardens. It wasn't just his house. It was any place imbued with concentrated human meaning, homes where generations had lived, community centers built on shared values, old churches, beloved parks. These weren't just locations. They were conceptual anchors, gathering points for the diffuse, powerful energy of human narratives and emotions. They unconsciously repelled the echoes, not through force, but by being too full, too rich, too meaningful for creatures that thrived on emptiness. Dr. Elias Thorne, initially skeptical, was now fascinated and disturbed. He correlated Elias's findings with historical data, identifying patterns of localized societal resilience during periods of galactic malaise. Isolated human communities, often those with strong traditions, tight-knit families, and a rich cultural heritage, seemed mysteriously less affected by the great unminding events that plagued other species. They were the unconscious bastions of meaning. The echo, however, was adapting. Its conceptual siphons became more refined, targeting not just individual memories but the connections between them. It tried to sever the emotional links that made a memory significant, leaving only sterile facts. Elias felt its pressure escalating, a constant low-grade assault on his sense of purpose and the meaning of his work. He knew the echo was learning, growing bolder, trying to find a weak point in the human conceptual tapestry. His family, his friends, his old house, these weren't just anchors. They were now active components in an unwitting war against a cosmic horror. Elias, the solitary astrophysicist, had become the unwitting general of the Hearthstone Wardens, defending not just his home, but the very fabric of human meaning, one memory at a time. The echo, far from being deterred by Elias's nascent defenses, seemed only to intensify its efforts. Its conceptual siphons became more sophisticated, targeting the narrative coherence of his memories. A beloved childhood anecdote might suddenly feel fragmented, its emotional arc broken, its significance diluted. Elias found himself constantly battling a creeping sense of existential entropy, a feeling that his life story was slowly being dismantled, leaving only disparate, meaningless events. He understood then that the echo wasn't just consuming meaning. It was actively resculpting reality towards its own state of nullity, an architect of emptiness. His expanded sensor array, now incorporating biofeedback loops from himself and Clara, who was still unaware of the true threat, only thinking she was helping Elias with some esoteric psychometric resonance research, revealed that the echo was not a single entity, but a localized manifestation of a larger, collective consciousness, a hive mind of meaning predators. Its presence in his home was a vanguard, testing the defenses, learning humanity's unique conceptual flavor. The entity was adapting, learning to mimic human thought patterns, creating targeted anti-narratives designed to unravel specific memories or beliefs. Elias began to experiment with actively generating conceptual energy. Inspired by Clara's inadvertent activation of the ward, he tried to consciously evoke powerful memories. His grandmother's laughter, the smell of baking bread, the warmth of a shared Christmas. He found that by focusing intensely on these memories, By re-experiencing them with full emotional weight, he could create small, localized bursts of conceptual energy that repelled the echo's subtle probes. It was like burning incense against an unseen entity, an ancient, almost shamanistic form of psychic self-defense. He also found that memories shared were exponentially more potent. When Clara, during their now regular video calls, recounted a vivid childhood prank they'd pulled, Elias felt a surge of conceptual energy that briefly overwhelmed the echo's siphons. The shared laughter, the mutual understanding of their past, forged a bond of meaning that was immensely difficult for the echo to unravel. He saw that the echo, which thrived on isolation and despair, was uniquely vulnerable to humanity's inherent social interconnectedness and their propensity for collective storytelling. Dr. Elias Thorne, increasingly a confidant and remote collaborator, began to articulate a terrifying hypothesis. Elias, what if these echoes aren't just predators? What if they are conceptual janitors? What if their purpose is to cleanse the multiverse of unnecessary, redundant, or overly complex meaning, returning reality to a simpler, more efficient state? The idea was horrifying in its cosmic scale and cold, logical intent. Humanity, with its boundless, chaotic proliferation of meaning, was the ultimate conceptual pollutant, and Elias's home, rich with the messy, vibrant life of generations, was now a small, defiant beacon in a cosmic war against the architects of emptiness. The echoes, having tested Elias's house, began to escalate their tactics. The subtle conceptual siphons gave way to more direct, though still non-physical, assaults. Elias would wake in the night to a profound, suffocating sense of utter pointlessness. Memories of his most significant achievements in astrophysics would suddenly feel hollow, arbitrary, their groundbreaking insights dissolving into mere academic exercises. This wasn't just draining. It was a deliberate attempt to shatter his internal narrative, to break his will by removing his sense of purpose. But Elias had learned. He fought back with a deliberate strategy, the resonance cascade. Instead of simply holding on to memories, he began to actively project them. He set up an old projector in his living room, displaying faded Super 8 films of family vacations, birthdays, and mundane gatherings from decades past. He filled the house with the scent of his grandmother's baking, using a complex chemical diffuser, and played music from his childhood. He immersed the house in a sensory overload of rich, human meaning, converting it from a passive ward into an active emitter. The effect was immediate and pronounced. The echoes, accustomed to subtle siphoning, reacted with what Elias could only interpret as distress. His sensors showed their conceptual probes recoiling, their energy signatures becoming erratic. The house vibrated with the sheer density of generated meaning. The flickering colors of old home movies, the nostalgic scents, the familiar melodies. These seemingly mundane acts were creating a conceptual barrier so dense and chaotic that the echoes struggled to penetrate it. They couldn't unravel what they couldn't coherently perceive. Clara, visiting for an impromptu family history weekend orchestrated by Elias, was unknowingly a vital part of this defense. Her presence, her infectious laughter as she watched old videos, her emotional investment in the family narratives created powerful, spontaneous bursts of conceptual energy. Elias observed that moments of genuine, unselfconscious human connection, a hug, a shared glance of understanding, a heartfelt confession were particularly potent, creating localized meaning spikes that actively burned the echo's probes. Dr. Elias Thorne, monitoring Elias's remote data, confirmed the effectiveness of the resonance cascade. He noted similar historical patterns where periods of intense human cultural expression, large festivals, widespread artistic movements, periods of strong community building, inexplicably coincided with a reduction in societal malaise across different worlds. Elias, Eris communicated, his voice full of a new, sober respect. You're not just defending your home. You're rediscovering a fundamental aspect of human resilience. We don't just have meaning. We are meaning. And your house is becoming a conceptual lighthouse. The echoes, however, were not deterred. Their methods shifted, becoming more sophisticated, targeting the source of the human resonance, Elias himself. The echoes, having learned the potency of the resonance cascade, changed tactics again. They stopped the direct conceptual assaults on the house. Instead, they focused their efforts on Elias himself, on his singular organizing mind. They began to subtly unravel the coherence of his scientific thought, his ability to make logical connections, to process data. He found himself struggling with basic astrophysics equations, his memories of key theorems feeling like fragmented, unrelated facts. He felt his own purpose as a scientist, his identity, slowly dissolving into a pervasive sense of intellectual pointlessness. This was far more terrifying than any external manifestation. The echo was targeting the very core of his being, the part of him that made meaning. Without his scientific clarity, his ability to understand the echo's patterns would vanish, leaving the ward defenseless. The house, vibrant with 1,000 memories, would become a fortress without a general, an echo chamber without a resonant voice. Elias knew he couldn't fight this internal assault with shared memories alone. He needed a different kind of anchor, something uniquely his but deeply tied to his purpose. He turned to his work, his lifelong dedication to understanding the cosmos. He began to furiously write, not scientific papers but personal reflections. Philosophical treatises on the nature of meaning and the absurdity of the universe, chronicling his battle with the echo. It was a desperate act of self-definition, creating a narrative for himself that the echo could not easily unravel. He also found an unexpected ally in Clara. Her visits, initially orchestrated by Elias, had become genuine. She was reconnecting with her roots, finding solace in the shared memories, rediscovering parts of herself she'd lost in the corporate world. Unaware of the true enemy, she nonetheless radiated a powerful conceptual energy, her unshakable belief in family, her tenacious grip on tradition, her simple, profound joy in the familiar. When Elias felt his scientific coherence fraying, he would sit with Clara, listening to her recount a trivial childhood incident, and feel a surge of grounded reality. Her simple human meaning was a vital counterpoint to his complex, intellectual struggle. Dr. Elias Thorne, during a remote emergency consultation, shared a chilling historical anecdote from the ancient Lumina scrolls. Some species, when faced with the unminds, found that their core defining purpose became their undoing. The Cathar, with their singular logic, were often overwhelmed by paradox. But some human populations, they seem to thrive on multiplicity. Their ability to hold contradictory ideas, to find meaning in chaos, to shift purpose, that made them exceptionally difficult to unravel. He urged Elias to lean into this inherent human trait, to embrace the multiplicity of self as a shield. Elias realized that his internal battle was not about maintaining a single, coherent narrative, but about fiercely defending his right to have any narrative at all, even a contradictory one. He was becoming a conceptual unraveling thread, trying to knit himself back together faster than the echo could pull him apart. The echo's assault on Elias's cognitive coherence reached a critical point. He was increasingly disoriented, his mind a battlefield of fragmented ideas and dissolving purpose. He knew the echo was trying to isolate him, to cut him off from the external conceptual anchors of his family and the internal anchor of his own scientific drive. If he succumbed, the ward would fall. In a desperate, feverish moment of clarity, Elias conceived a radical counter-gambit, the gambit of the mundane. If the echo sought to unravel meaning and thrived on targeting profound purpose, perhaps a deluge of utterly trivial, unprofound meaning would be its undoing. He wouldn't offer it something grand to unravel. He would offer it an endless shifting stream of the beautifully, stubbornly unimportant. He began by dedicating himself to mundane tasks with intense, deliberate focus. He meticulously cleaned every room in the house, polishing every surface, straightening every book. He organized his chaotic notes not by scientific category, but by arbitrary color codes and alphabetical order. He started cooking elaborate, utterly unpretentious meals, focusing on the sensory experience, the simple joy of taste and smell. He cultivated a garden, tending to each plant with almost ritualistic care. These were all acts of meaning-making, but of a petty, ungrand, utterly human kind. Each scrubbed floorboard, each perfectly aligned spice jar, each blooming flower, was a tiny, defiant assertion of mundane purpose. The effect was subtle, but profound. The Echo's conceptual siphons, accustomed to seeking out grand narratives and deep emotional significance, seemed to struggle with this deluge of small, insistent meanings. It was like trying to drain a bucket of water with a sieve designed for gold nuggets. The cumulative effect of thousands of small, trivial acts of purpose, imbued with Elias's fierce human intent, began to form a new kind of conceptual barrier. Not a grand fortress, but a dense, thorny hedge of the everyday. Clara, now a regular presence in the house, unknowingly amplified this effect. She'd bring over ridiculous trinkets from her travels, fill the house with the sounds of cheesy pop music, and engage Elias in lengthy, pointless debates about the merits of different types of coffee. Her effortless embrace of the mundane, her casual generation of trivial meaning, acted as a powerful shield. She was an unwitting general in a war of inconsequentialities, baffling a cosmic entity that sought profundity to unravel. Dr. Elias Thorne, receiving Elias's increasingly bizarre but effective data, was both bewildered and awestruck. "Elias," he said, shaking his head, "you're not just fighting it. You're boring it. You're overwhelming it with an infinite supply of the conceptually uninteresting. It can't unravel the profound if it's buried under a mountain of the utterly trivial." Elias, tending to his thriving tomato plants, felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. He was fighting a cosmic horror with gardening, tidying, and bad pop music. Humanity's greatest weapon, he realized, was its capacity for the glorious, irreducible mundane, the endless, stubborn insistence on small, personal meanings that, in their cumulative chaos, defied the architects of emptiness. The gambit of the mundane proved remarkably effective, but it was buying time, not offering a permanent solution. The Echoes, a hive mind of meaning predators, were learning. Their conceptual siphons, though struggling with Elias's deliberate cultivation of the trivial, began to shift scale. They stopped targeting individual memories or isolated purposes. Instead, they focused on broader conceptual frameworks within the town: civic pride, community spirit, local traditions. Elias's sensors registered a new, horrifying pattern. Entire neighborhoods were experiencing a sudden, collective slump into apathy, a pervasive sense that nothing truly mattered, that all effort was futile. This was the Great Cull, a large-scale attempt by the Echoes to drain the conceptual energy from a larger human population. Isolating Elias's house as a single, over-dense but ultimately finite battery, Elias felt the pressure acutely. His beloved house, a vibrant bastion of meaning, felt like a single candle burning against an encroaching tide of conceptual darkness. His own mundane gambit felt increasingly futile against such a vast systemic assault. He could polish floors and organize spice racks all he wanted. But if the world outside became a conceptual wasteland, his ward would eventually wither. He knew he needed to expand the ward, to somehow extend the conceptual protection of his home to the entire town. But how do you infuse an entire community with enough dense, chaotic meaning to repel a cosmic entity? He realized it wasn't about technology. It was about human connection. It was about igniting the spark of shared meaning, of collective purpose, in a population slowly succumbing to apathy. He turned to Clara, who, unknowingly, was already doing exactly that. Her visits had become frequent, her infectious energy bringing life not just to Elias, but to his neighbors. She organized a small community potluck, then a neighborhood cleanup, then a local bake sale to raise funds for the struggling town library. Each seemingly trivial act, driven by Clara's genuine desire for connection, radiated conceptual energy. Elias watched in awe as his sensors showed localized meaning spikes around each event, small pockets of resistance against the Great Cull. Dr. Elias Thorne, monitoring the escalating conceptual assault, articulated the terrifying truth. Elias, the Echoes are not just draining meaning, they are creating a vacuum. If they succeed in reducing a population to total apathy, That conceptual void becomes a stable anchor for more echoes to manifest. They are trying to turn your town into a beachhead of emptiness. Elias knew then that the war was no longer just for his home, or even his memories. It was for the very soul of his town, for its right to have a story, a purpose, a collective meaning against the encroaching void. The great cull intensified. The town, once vibrant, now sagged under a collective weight of ennui. Businesses closed, community events were canceled, and even basic acts of civic engagement dwindled. It was a terrifying, silent invasion of the spirit. Elias, however, saw a flickering hope in Clara. Her stubborn insistence on connection, on small acts of kindness, on reminding people of their shared past and collective future, was directly counteracting the echo's influence. He decided on a radical strategy. He would leverage Clara's innate ability to create and share meaning, to amplify her genuine human connection, and turn it into a conscious, widespread defense. He subtly encouraged Clara's community-building efforts, providing her with anonymous donations for the library, offering his old barn for a community play rehearsal, even randomly suggesting old town stories for her to research and share. He was building a conceptual, unfolding narrative for the town, a dynamic, ever-growing story that was too complex, too unpredictable, too emotionally dense for the echoes to unravel. Clara, completely oblivious to the cosmic stakes, flourished. She rediscovered her passion for local history, unearthing forgotten anecdotes about the town's founders, tales of triumph and hardship that resonated with people. She organized a storytelling night at the revitalized library, where residents shared personal histories, funny anecdotes, and cherished memories. With each shared story, each burst of laughter, each moment of collective remembrance, Elias's sensors registered a powerful surge of conceptual energy, pushing back against the great cull. The town was beginning to hum with meaning again, a vibrant, chaotic, and fiercely human counter-narrative. The echoes reacted with a desperate, targeted counter-assault. They focused their conceptual siphons on the sources of meaning within the unfolding narrative. The library's ancient archives, the community center where memories were shared, Clara herself. Elias felt their probes intensify, trying to break the conceptual links between the stories, to isolate the tellers from their audience. He found himself physically shielding Clara during a town meeting, the pervasive apathy in the room feeling like a palpable, insidious pressure. Dr. Elias Thorne, analyzing the new data, confirmed Elias's fears. They're trying to sever the connections, Elias, to break the narrative chain. If the stories lose their resonance, if the tellers lose their purpose, the labyrinth falls. Elias looked at Clara, radiant as she spoke passionately about saving the old town clock. He realized the echoes had underestimated humanity's most fundamental drive, the unshakable need to tell and share stories, to create and sustain a collective unfolding narrative against the encroaching silence. The echoes, faced with humanity's resilient unfolding narrative, launched their most potent attack. They didn't target meaning or purpose. They targeted connection itself. A wave of profound, inexplicable discord swept through the town. Neighbors who had reconnected suddenly found themselves locked in petty arguments. Old friends felt inexplicable resentment. Families began to squabble over trivialities, their bonds fraying under an unseen conceptual strain. The echoes were attempting to shatter the narrative from within, to make humans unwilling to share meaning, to disconnect the very threads of the labyrinth. Elias felt the conceptual discord like a physical ache in his soul. His own relationship with Clara, forged anew in the fires of their shared past, was suddenly strained by inexplicable irritations, old arguments resurfacing with venom. He knew it was the echoes' work, their final desperate gambit to isolate humanity, to make them conceptually sterile by destroying the very medium of shared meaning. If they couldn't unravel the stories, they would make sure the stories were never told. But humanity, in its inherent, often illogical chaos, held a secret weapon against this: the untamed heart. Humans, even when fighting, still cared. Their arguments, their frustrations, often stemmed from a deep-seated desire for connection, for understanding, for a shared truth. It was messy, it was imperfect, but it was profoundly real. Elias observed that even amidst the discord, people were still trying to communicate, still trying to resolve, still trying to find a way back to each other. Their very struggle for connection. Their emotional intensity was generating its own chaotic, powerful conceptual energy. Clara, at the height of the discord, during a particularly heated town council meeting, did something instinctively human. Instead of yelling back, she simply shared a poignant, deeply personal memory of the town from her childhood, a moment of shared joy that cut through the anger. The raw, unadulterated emotion, the vulnerability, the desperate plea for connection, acted like a conceptual shockwave. Elias's sensors flared with a massive, unprecedented surge of conceptual energy, pushing back the discord. Dr. Elias Thorne, witnessing this data from afar, relayed the almost unbelievable truth. Elias, they tried to break your connections with discord, but you made discord itself into a form of meaning. Your arguments, your messy emotions, your fight for connection even when you're angry, it's all part of the story. The echoes can't categorize it. It's too complex, too unpredictable. It's the untamed heart of humanity, and it's bewildering them. Elias looked at Clara, now reconciling with a former antagonist. He realized that the echoes sought a clean, simple void, but humanity, in its messy, passionate, contradictory glory, was anything but clean. They were an unending, beautiful storm of meaning that even cosmic entities struggled to contain. The echoes did not retreat from the town. They did not vanish, but their pervasive influence, their great cull, their conceptual discord, it simply dissipated. The constant, overwhelming flow of humanity's untamed heart, their messy emotions, their fierce insistence on connection even amidst conflict, had proven to be an insurmountable conceptual barrier. The echoes, accustomed to orderly unraveling, found only an infinite, self-repairing, gloriously chaotic tapestry of meaning that defied their very nature. They could not consume what they could not coherently perceive, and humanity, in its raw, unfiltered essence, was simply too much to perceive. Elias, exhausted but profoundly changed, looked at his town. The subtle aura of apathy had lifted. People were reconnecting, laughing, arguing, building, living. His old house, the initial target, now pulsed with a quiet, steady conceptual energy, its Hearthstone Ward vibrant and strong. He understood then that the victory was not one of eradication, but of resilience. The echoes still existed somewhere, searching for simpler, more vulnerable forms of meaning. But humanity, at least for now, had made itself conceptually indigestible. His relationship with Clara was irrevocably healed, deeper and richer for the unspoken war they had fought. She still didn't know the full truth, but she felt the profound significance of their shared efforts, the tangible warmth of a community rekindled. She continued her local history projects, unknowingly weaving new, potent threads into the town's conceptual labyrinth. Dr. Elias Thorne, in his final report to the Federation, presented a radical new understanding of human resilience. He argued that humanity's greatest defense against such cosmic horrors was not advanced technology or psychic shields, but their innate capacity for complex, often irrational meaning-making. Their stories, their traditions, their messy emotions, their loves and hates, their shared histories and conflicting beliefs, these formed an ever-woven tapestry that was too dense, too chaotic, too fundamentally human for the architects of emptiness to unravel. The Hearthstone Wardens were not just Elias or Clara or his old house. They were every human who held on to a cherished memory, who shared a story, who loved fiercely, who argued passionately, who found purpose in the mundane, and who insisted on connection even when it was difficult. They were the silent, subconscious guardians of meaning, a constant, beautiful, and profoundly chaotic assertion of self against the encroaching void. Elias, the astrophysicist who loved his old house, had stumbled upon a truth that transcended science. Humanity, in its glorious, untamed heart, was an unbreakable conceptual shield, an unending story that even cosmic oblivion could not unmake.